Grove branch. And welcome for joining us. Very excited to have author Peter Rock here tonight. We've been talking about it a lot with patrons as they've been coming here. I know there's been quite a bit of publicity, especially with his newest book, which we'll be talking about tonight, The Night Swimmers, his memoir that takes place in Ephraim. And when he came in earlier this summer, I asked him, what's the best way? We had a quick elevator speech way to describe it. And he said, part memoir, part daydream. And I kept that in mind when I read it, and every time that I advise people on it, and I think it's a really great way to capture it. And I know I personally connected with it really well. I listened to it on audiobook. We have both formats available in the library system. We're happy to put you on hold. If you don't have a library card, anybody can get a library card. You just need an ID, and we can create one for you and get you in line for these. And there's, just a lot of really great connections with our county in here. And I think it's a great book as a human to read. You connect with a lot of different things, reflecting on your past, things that have happened, and things that inform your present and inform your future. And he'll talk more about it tonight. But one of the other things that really excited people when I was telling them about Peter is he's a professor out in Portland, Oregon. And he spent many of his summers growing up here in Door County. And his family, Bonnie, right here, Bonnie Rock, his mom, she's a dear patron of ours here. And it's very nice to have her here tonight, and very good to see her. And she first introduced me to Peter's writing with actually this book, My Abandonment, and she brought it one day, and she was just so excited about it, so proud, and has helped educate me on it. And I finally was able to get a copy of Leave No Trace. It has been non-stop checking out, and I did get a chance to watch it. And if you don't know the connection between these two pieces, My Abandonment is a book that Peter wrote. And this film, which is available on Blu-ray and DVD, is actually based off of his book. So this is Leave No Trace. This film is based off of My Abandonment. Very good.
He got an award for the best piece of literature that was made in the movie.
Yes, definitely. She's been a huge support and definitely makes it exciting to have you here tonight, and has been instrumental in helping getting it in our system, and people have just been reading and eating it up, and it's been great. And the DVDs, I can't keep them on the shelf. I've been buying more. And advising other libraries to get it as well. So very excited to have it here. I'll let him take it away. If anybody wants these flyers, Morgan, our communications manager for Door County Library back here, she made up these flyers. If anybody wants it as like a keepsake or something tonight, you're welcome to take them. We have them at the desk. We also have Peter Sloma from the Peninsula Bookmint here tonight, and he has copies of Peter's book that's in print available at the front desk. There's a table that is set up over there if anybody wants to pick up your own copy. So, over to you. Go ahead. Thank you, Pete.
Thank you all for coming. I was just saying, readings make me kind of nervous. Readings to my students maybe make me the most nervous. Readings to people I know are pretty terrifying, especially if they appear in the book. So we're going to run into that a little bit this evening. So bear with me. I want to say thanks to Christina, who we've been in conversation a lot about this event and setting it up. And also Peter for bringing the books. If you'd like to buy one, he's the person to talk to. If you want to buy a different book, you should also buy it from him in one of his stores. I should thank my mother, of course, for giving birth to me. And pretty much being a pretty good supporter throughout these 52 years. Some of you, most of you maybe have been to book readings. It's going to be a combination of me reading from the book, talking about the book. I'm going to project some images which hopefully will distract you from just watching me. And then in about half an hour, I'll take a few questions. And within, I don't know, let's say 50 minutes from now, we'll be done. I'm going to start from the very beginning, so it doesn't need any setup. I thank my wife too in advance for lending me her reading glasses. Let's see what's better. To swim with another person out in the open water at night across a distance without stopping is like taking a walk without the pressure or weight of having to carry a conversation to bring what is inside to the outside. Think of being with someone in a silent room, the tension in the air. Water is thicker and you can't talk, can't stop moving. Instead, you are together, struggling along, only glimpsing each other's silhouetted arm or head for a moment when you turn your face to breathe, a reassurance that you are not completely alone. I remember the straight black line of Mrs. Abel's clavicle, her shadow on the road that summer overlapping mine, her collar hanging open another time, her thin hand on the toaster, pushing down the lever, then her palm hovering there, feeling the heat. The low whisper of her voice, her stories of shipwrecks in death's door, the floor of the lake like the forest floor, bones and timbers collapsing, scattered by the currents. I remember Mrs. Abel's slender arms, one then the other, bent above the surface of the water, her face flashing in the moonlight. We swam through the darkness, parallel, rising and falling across the black swell. Ahead, the distant silhouette of the tower. Headlights winked through the trees, cars driving on the road atop the bluff. I breathed to my right, she to her left, checking for each other. Below us, depths. I've read from this book a fair amount, and I have a certain way that I usually do it, and I'm not going to do it that way tonight because I'm here, so I'm going to focus on the Door County side. But it's a book that is full of all kinds of different love stories and ghost stories, ex-girlfriends floating in isolation tanks, watercolor painters, psychic photographers. It kind of travels around through time and space quite a bit, accounting for this character at an earlier age and now trying to piece it together. And you'll see that as I read. I've never read the second chapter aloud, so we'll see how it goes. The night of Mrs. Abel's party, I walked down out of the cedars onto the white stones of the beach. A storm was coming in, rows of white caps tearing across the lake, the wind gusting cold. I started along the shoreline, almost tripping over the taut ropes that stretched from the trees to the rowboats and canoes that were pulled up beyond the wave's reach. It was June of 1994, and I was 26. I'd returned from various wanderings to live again with my parents, and was maintaining vague dreams of becoming a writer, of writing. My parents were alternately patient and impatient with this. They told me that I could stay for the summer on that thin peninsula in Wisconsin, where I'd spend every summer of my boyhood. I was secretly planning to stay through the autumn as long as I could before the winter drove me away. I had nowhere else to go, nowhere I was supposed to be. The wind rattled the metal fittings of the flagpole out on the end of Zimdar's dock. As I headed down the beach under the lights of our neighbors' houses, I felt the temptation with each dock and pier I passed, the desire to shed my clothes and run to the end to leap off into the dark waves. I love to swim, and I love to swim at night. A few nights before, I'd been out swimming along the shoreline, and I'd seen flickering light, shifting shadows in the windows of the rundown cabin set near where our road had ended, a house that had long been dark. All the people along the shore were equally surprised to hear that the cabin was inhabited. Few had known Mr. Abel well, nor had anyone seen him in quite some time. Few had even known that he had passed away, and no one was aware that he'd recently been married. The invitations to the party had come from the old man's widow. Like everyone else, I was curious, drawn by the mystery. I myself hadn't exactly been invited to the party. My parents had been, though my father chose not to go. My excuse was that I was going to retrieve my mother, walk her home through the darkness. Once I reached the Abel cabin, I paused, standing below it on the beach, I could hear voices from the party, laughter. In the lit windows above, I could see the heads, the upper bodies of people I knew, the Hogues, the Gwems, and then some I didn't know, one of whom was likely Mrs. Abel. I stepped into the trees, out of the moonlight, past the wooden doors that closed off the storage space beneath the Abel cabin. I climbed the slope around the cabin toward the back door, which was open. People were leaving, exuberant with wine. They shouted my name when they saw me. "You're all grown up. Getting any writing done? Thinking about that day job yet?" I joked along uneasily, making my way through the door into the dim cabin. I was used to this banter, the uneven, sporadic way I'd see these people, only in the summer, often years apart. It was a syncopation that brought wonder at my growth when I was young, and it now degenerated into a kind of embarrassment at my stasis, my stalled progress. Inside, the cabin was lit by candles, 2 kerosene lanterns on a table, shadows flickered along the walls. Bowls full of different colored beach glass, blue, white, and green, caught the candlelight from the top of the piano. The cabin was small, shaped like an L. I didn't see my mother. Most of the voices and the people seemed to be around the corner, what must have been the kitchen. I crossed the shadowy room, past a low, threadbare couch, around a table. One window faced the lake, and beside it a wooden ladder slanted, leading to a sleeping loft above. The ladder had been sawn off 10 feet up, and was splattered with white paint. Reaching out, I touched one of the rungs, the duct tape wrapped around it. People behind me were talking about the old man. When and how he died, who had seen him last, lakeside property, who had it, who might sell or inherit it, taxes, was a favorite topic up and down the shore. Some of the party had no doubt been maintaining the designs on this cabin, this parcel of land, and so they were curious where this mysterious widow had come from, and how she came to possess this property, and what were her intentions. The air in the room smelled like kerosene, sharp and acrid, tight in my throat. The sound of the wind and the waves came through the window next to me, rattled the glass. Next to the window, a piece of paper had been set with one nail into a log wall. One side was torn, its edge like the lids of a wave. It had been torn from a book, and candlelight flickered along the image. It was a painting of a fire in a spare forest, red leaves or sparks leaping above the flames into the broken branches of the charred trees above. The moon shone down, and in the background at the bottom of a slope stood a small cabin striped white and gray, concrete and timber just like the one I was standing inside. The yellow window of that cabin could be the one I was standing beside. Suddenly I felt trapped, claustrophobic. I closed my eyes, certain that if I looked out the window, I would see a forest fire in the moonlight, rather than the storm coming across the lake. "Are you going to climb into my bedroom?" she said. I let loose of the ladder and turned to face her, this woman whom I'd never seen before, who had to be Mrs. Abel. She was tall and slender, as tall as I was, almost 6 feet. "No," I said, "You can if you want," she said, gesturing at the loft. "Go ahead." "I just came from my mother," I said, glancing past Mrs. Abel toward the kitchen to walk her home. "I know who you are," she said. "You're the swimmer." We were alone in the room, and it was uncomfortable. It felt impolite to look straight at her, but I could see that she wore pale blue moccasins, the kind with beads on top, black and white and red in the shape of a bird. No socks, her ankles exposed, her khakis reaching halfway to her calves. Her shirt was a blue Oxford with the sleeves rolled up, its tail long. Perhaps it had belonged to her husband, and its collar threadbare. She lifted her hand, adjusted her braid, and I saw the pale flash of her neck, the nape for an instant. Smiling, she looked at me, her eyes at the same level as mine. Pale eyes, blue, her bangs cut straight just above them, her black hair was shot through with strands of gray. "Isn't that true?" she said. "What?" I said. "That you're the swimmer." "I guess," I said, "I do like to swim." "How far do you go?" she said. "I don't know," I said, "as far as I can. I went out to Horseshoe the other day." That was the closest island, just over 2 miles from our shore. Turning away, I leaned close to the window so I could see past my reflection out to the black waves rolling across the lake. I couldn't see the silhouette of the distant island. "I love storms," Mrs. Abel said, "don't you?" In that moment, she drew closer. I felt as if she was going to reach out and touch me, but she did not. "Your mother left half an hour ago," she said, her voice a whisper, "before you got here. She must have known you were coming. I came along the beach, I said. I guess she came through the woods or the road. People emerged from the kitchen, then waving and saying goodnight, saying thank you as they stood in the doorway. The party was coming to an end. Nice to talk with you, swimmer, Mrs. Abel said, and went to say her goodbyes. I'm going to shift to the third chapter. Mrs. Abel told me once that the party was an attempt to handle all the introductions at once and to lessen people's interest in and curiosity about her. In this latter desire, she failed. The peninsula in the summer was a place of leisure, of talk, and the gossip was drawn to what was unknown, what could be speculated upon, this natural mystery brought among us. People describe Mrs. Abel as a striking woman. Striking. It always felt to me like an aggressive way to say it. Her blue eyes, I heard people describe them as piercing, as if they might stab right through you. She speaks many languages. English isn't even her first. She doesn't even own a car. She doesn't talk small talk. She washes her clothing in the lake. She is a severe vegetarian. She was married to him for less than a month before he died. She tore out all the electrical wiring in her camper. Someone reported seeing Mrs. Abel running along the highway at night by the AC tap, her shoes in her hands and her hair loose in her face. Others said that Mr. Abel was not her first husband and quite possibly not even her second. Some wives felt that Mrs. Abel was over-friendly with their husbands. Others claimed she was equally unfriendly to everyone. And still others suggested that she was shy, quiet, and she was grieving after all. There was the talk and then the talk under the talk, pulling everyone in early that summer. An undertow, all childhoods are haunted by reports of this current that takes hold of your feet and holds you under, that only lets loose once you're drowned. It's not a thing that can be suspected, let alone resisted. Books and experts claim that such vortices and currents don't actually exist, that they're exaggerations born of people trying to swim against a riptide. And yet, as I swim along this surface, I feel unseen weather, underwater winds. Just the other morning in Oregon, over 20 years later, I was walking my daughter to kindergarten. We were holding hands, talking about the long winter, which I had been reading to her and her sister the night before. Do you think, she said, that Laura should have married Cap Garland instead of Almanzo? Definitely, I said. Would you marry Cap Garland, she said. Of course, I said, if he asked. Why? His name's much cooler, I said, for one thing. And Almanzo always seemed kind of old. Dropping my hand, she bent her head back. She looked up into the sky and said, those birds are flying in the shape of a question mark. To me, it looked like a ragged, uncoiling spiral disappearing over the brick elementary school, the treetops. Why do you think they're flying in that shape? I asked her. They have a question up there, she said. We walked on past the balance beam and slide, the jungle gym, past older kids playing basketball. You can go, Daddy, she said, letting go of my hand. I'll stay with you, I said. The bell hasn't rung yet. I don't need you to stay, she said. I know that, I said. Still, I don't want you to stay, she said. I hurried away past the bike rack. She looked up at the sky once more, then disappeared around the red brick building. I followed at a distance. I peered around the corner and saw her walk among the crowds of children and parents, not pausing or looking at anyone. Her face was so serious, self-sufficient, and mysterious to me. She was prepared for the business of her day. So now that I've gotten old enough that I have to borrow my wife's glasses to be able to read the books that I wrote, I sometimes don't forget, I don't remember the things that I've written, and people talk to me about books that I wrote 20 years ago and what happens in them, and I don't know. And when I look at the actual sentences, I often feel like I didn't write them. The syntax feels wrong. I don't remember writing them. I don't remember anything about them. But I can remember the things that I was struggling with in my life at that time when I read the books. You know, that's what was going on then. And I think that we all probably have the experience of working on something that's invisible or working on something in our thoughts and in our personal life and seeing our external life echo that in different ways. So when I'm working on a book, there's a lot of kind of symbiosis between my external life and my internal life, my past and my present. And this time, I was beset by these two daughters when I was writing the book. And those of you who have kids know they're at a certain age where they're saying things that are simultaneously really profound and seem to resonate with what I'm doing and what I'm thinking about. Also kind of stupid, but they didn't come to the reading, so I could say whatever I want about them. And so this time they started talking in ways that seemed so similar to what I was doing that I started to wonder if I should include them in what I was writing, and eventually I did include some of those conversations, which was one step into a pretty complicated balancing act between what had actually happened in my life, or what was happening in my life, and things that I was imagining could have happened, or should have happened, or might happen in the future. So I'm going to read a couple other small sections here that are shorter than that section. I didn't sleep in my parents' cabin. Instead, I stayed in a shack up the slope, hidden in the woods. It had been built on the shore, a beach house where people changed clothes, and at some point it had been put on rollers, dragged up into the trees, painted the red of a faded barn. It was named the Red Cabin, though it was more of a shack with no running water. 10 by 15 feet, one room, a slanted roof. Its 5 square windows all along one wall were offset, so they looked like a jagged row of teeth. The screen's door spring shrieked, and no one ever rung the metal bell on the wall outside, its clapper and mouth all ensnarled with cobwebs. After swimming, I would walk through the woods to the Red Cabin. I'd come into the sound of that screen door, and the air was always moist, the damp smell of the straw mats on the floor, and I'd lay down in the futon that took up half the space. I'd turn over and look up at the orange and red sunfish sail wrapped around its mast, various ropes hanging down, the black windsurfer booms casting wishbone shadows, until I switched off the lamp. Before I fell asleep, I wondered what would happen to me, and I wondered about Mrs. Abel, and I had no way of knowing. And then sometimes I'd sit down at my little table, my hair still damp, and try to write. I had one small gooseneck lamp, and in the window I could see my reflection sitting there with a pen in my hand. I could also see through the window up to the gravel road, where neighbors walked by in the dusk, where cars passed. I liked the feeling of sitting there, illuminated in the window. Any neighbor walking by could see me, there in the shack in the woods, pen in hand. They might comment on it, mention it to each other, to my parents, and would remember how I looked sitting there, apparently deep in thought, writing. Around that time, that summer, I remember telling someone that I wanted every story I wrote to say this, implicitly, to the reader: I'm coming over to your house. I thought that was an impressive thing to say, and I said it to impress this person, this young woman. In truth, I think I also believed it, that this kind of insistence was something to desire, a necessity. Now, over 20 years later, my declaration has changed. Will you please come along with me? I would like company. I'm uncertain where I'm going, and I'm a little frightened. Leaping ahead. A year or so ago, one August afternoon, I walked through these woods with my daughters, visiting the forts and hideouts from the stories I had told them. The girls followed me to the Red Cabin, seeking to find a canoe paddle or bicycle. It's mostly used for storage now, and while we still call it the Red Cabin, several years ago it was painted a flat, dark gray. The screen door opened with the exact same sound, that terrible shriek. By the door, a bike, my Schwinn Cruiser from college, hung upside down. It's still there, its white wall tires off its rims, its seat half eaten away. And the sails are still there, unused for years, far away from the wind of the lake. And the Montana license plates from my long-ago truck. And tacked to the wall above the desk, yellow slips of paper, a passage from the journals of Albert Camus. It is only in order to shine sooner that the author refuses to rewrite. Despicable. Begin again. A rejection letter from C. Michael Curtis at the Atlantic, July 6, 1995. Dear Mr. Rock, still no luck, but thanks for the look. Passive-aggressive quotation out of a letter from Hemingway to Fitzgerald. Summer's a discouraging time to work. You don't feel death coming on the way it does in the fall when the boys really put pen to paper. A postcard of a weathered Cormac McCarthy sent from a friend whose first book was being published, who had his picture taken by the same photographer as Cormac. She'd given him the postcard. Glad to hear you happy, friend. It eludes me, it does, but we still have time, don't we? My daughter is bored with this musty detritus, the spider webs everywhere, spilled back outside, began playing on the dangerous balance beams my father had set up so long ago, and climbing on the small stone table we built once in honor of Aslan and Narnia. Standing in the red cabin, surrounded by the artifacts of that other person, by my old things, I felt a sense of dislocation, caught between times, in two times at once. My daughters laughed and shouted, impatient beneath the cedars. Before I opened the screen door, I leaned close to the wall to look into another faded piece of paper tacked there. It's a photocopy of a photograph of a handless blind boy reading Braille with his lips. I always had this with me. There are rusted holes along its top border from the various tacks and nails that affixed it to the walls above the tables and desks where I wrote as I moved from place to place in those years. I wanted my writing to be worthy of such a boy, handless and blind, a reader who would kiss every letter of every word. Was I oblivious to the pretension of this gesture, blind myself to the insensitivity it displayed? I fear I was. I suspect that perhaps this picture was as much for other people to see, to be disturbed and impressed, as it was to inspire me. If there's a place where this book came from, it was that moment in the red cabin with my daughters. And usually when I get a feeling that there's something I need to explore when I'm really confused, and I felt it was so uncanny that I felt like these artifacts that were surrounding me weren't really mine. They didn't seem to belong to a person that I recognized as continuous with my experience, but I knew that that was me. And so I started to react to the artifacts and see what would come out of me, which is really how I think of inspiration, as I've talked to some of you about. I know that it's just, if I'm drawn to something and I'm curious about it, I just want to see how I'll react, what will happen. So this time, I was reacting to things that came out of me initially. Usually it's something that's further outside of me, whether it's the story of a father and daughter living in the wilderness, or photographs taken by other people and trying to imagine what the story was. So this book kind of grew out of me sort of gathering material and then gathering more material and sort of trying to be attuned to the things that were flying at me as I wrote it. Read two other short pieces. I found it's very bad luck to read a piece that involves one daughter and not read a piece where the other daughter appears. So even though they're not here, I'll do this. Just the other day, I was walking through the playroom where my daughters have various hammocks and trapezes suspended by chains. My 8-year-old Ida was sitting on a small round trampoline reading a book I'd never seen before, The Mysterious Monsters of Loch Ness. I think it actually lives there, she said. There is proof, but there's not much of it. Problem is that there's more people that don't believe than people that do. And this book is old, so they've probably found out more since then. When my older daughter went upstairs to play with her sister, I picked up the book. Here in these pages, the old familiar photos, the hypotheses, the propositions. The more you study the Loch and the case for its animals being real, the more real they seem. This seems to be true of most phenomena that are eventually understood, whereas the further you investigate a myth, the less real it becomes. I have always had an affinity with ghosts lingering from the past as they do, unfinished with what they left behind. That said, the three mysteries that obsessed me throughout my childhood were UFOs, Bigfoot, and the Loch Ness Monster. I believed, I wanted to believe. I lay awake, trembling at the possibilities, taut with fear and excitement. I collected magazines with titles like UFOs, No Hoax, and Cryptozoology. I clipped out photographs and articles, kept them all in file folders to display and convince. One reason I preferred the Loch Ness Monster was because it lived in Scotland. and was safely bounded by water, unable to burst into my life, into my nighttime bedroom, as aliens or Bigfoot might. Once in 4th grade, I gave a presentation on these topics. A smart classmate, Jennifer Durham, sharply questioned my assertion that an organism as large as a dinosaur could survive by eating nothing but the skin of its teeth. I found my source and quoted the scientist. If the creature has been able to survive, it is only by the skin of its teeth. That was an early lesson for me in the dangers of language, of reading metaphors literally and not recognizing figuration. This is a practice, a tendency, that continues to trouble me. I think the last piece I'll read is for those of you who are fans or enemies of Chick Peterson or Steve Sauter. I rode away from the post office up the slope and past the yellow slow blind child sign. When we were young, we always laughed at that sign, at this child doubly afflicted. Later, I saw a photograph of my brother's dorm room in college where that sign, stolen, was proudly displayed. Still later, my friend Steve Sauter bought and moved into the house of the slow blind child, a house with a broken elevator that took Steve 10 years to fail to renovate. I pedaled on, the bluff rose on my right, and for a moment I imagined I was underwater, my legs pedaling in slow motion. Up another slope through an intersection, I rode up onto Moravia Street where the tree's branches met like an arch overhead, shade deep beneath them. I passed the house and studio of the watercolor painter Charles Peterson, who is well known for painting ghost images, wherein benign spirits, past people, coexist in present times, sharing space with the living. The faded picture of a woman looking out a window, caught in the reflection of the glass, a seeming empty rocking chair that upon closer inspection holds a woman reading to her child, an abandoned schoolhouse full of transparent students. Peterson painted my portrait once when I was 10 years old. For some reason, my parents had each of us, my 2 sisters, my brother, and me, painted when we were 10 years old. And these spectral portraits always hung in the living room in Salt Lake City, as if we were the same age, uneasy quadruplets. Now my parents have sold that house, dispersed its contents. The portrait of my younger self now hangs in this room where I write, watching me. I looked serious, uneasy, trying to hold my head steady, not to blink while I was being painted. Shortly after my portrait was delivered from Wisconsin to Utah, it was discovered that someone, definitely my older sister, Jen, had penciled in my nostrils, and it had to be sent back and repaired. Also, I look hopeful. So I'll finish there and see if people have questions. Yes?
I would like to complain that I'm not in
You know, like most things that I write, it was once about 700 pages long and everyone was in it. And so it became, it's the rare case so far that the people who are in it are happy to be in it, and the people who are not in it wish they were. But I definitely vetted large sections of the people who appear in the book and said, like, is this okay, or is that okay? And I changed a few things, I changed a few names a little bit, but mostly it's a kind of a strange thing, and maybe not a good thing to have done. But I always assumed that I would change the names of people when I got to the last draft. And then it was convincing to me to use their actual names. At the last minute, I decided to just kind of leave them in there. And I think that's okay, because it's my version of them or my recollection of them. But I think it's a different thing when you take real people and have them doing and saying things they never did or said, and interacting with people who aren't real at all. But I did it. So yes.
First of all, I love your book.
Thank you.
The one portion where you have to suspend disbelief, and I'd like more of your metaphysical explanation, is where did Mrs. Abel go when she was lost on the swim, and when she explained it later? And where does this belief come from? Just your thoughts on it.
It seems to come up, someone pointed out, it comes up often in my writing, where there are spaces underwater where people can go. In this book, it's very much, it's a mystery. You know, there are things that whenever I talk to book groups or when I'm talking to a group of people like this, I can't answer everything. I'm just, you know, I've written to the end of my knowledge, and there, as an author, I feel like my job is to make an experience for people and not explain it to them. And I can't hopefully travel everywhere where someone's reading my book. But it was sort of, in a way, that mystery was where this book started. I knew that was going to happen also. And whether or not she returned at different times, what she had to say about it, and how that was maddening. It's definitely a book that's very much first-person narrator, and it's limited to what this person can know and what this person can find out. And she's a pretty mysterious character. And so that's a mystery that she takes with her, I guess. So that's a pretty, thank you for loving my book. I'm sorry to give you such a wishy-washy answer. Yes?
I can't figure out if there really was a Mrs. Abel at one point. And I also have two endings in my head. One is about swimming out and drowning. And the other one is about seeing you with your family and knowing that you'd be okay. So she felt she believed in it. But I like both endings equally well. And you probably won't tell me if you.
I think they're both good. I think those are both good readings. I think it's pretty open. The ending, I think for me a good ending is where there are still a lot of questions, but there are some answers. There's enough sense of what's going to happen next, that there's a mystery of, you know, in a year what might happen or what could happen. And yeah, as to Mrs. Abel, there are a lot of questions. I've heard Nancy Davis often comes up, but doesn't really fit in some ways. It's kind of an agglomeration of all of the excellent women that I knew when I was growing up at that time. But it could be a real person too. Yes?
I remember your dad said to me, I don't know about Peter's writing. That Mr. Zapp, he didn't live in that place, but wrote his dissertation.
Right.
So Peter says it's really a memoir. It is a novel. Some of it's true and some of it isn't. But I felt like you needed Mrs. Abel. You weren't all right.
Well,
She disappeared. She didn't have to.
I think we should talk about this somewhere else. Yeah, it's true. I know a lot of people probably know the art of Albert Zahn. The Bailey's Harbor Birdhouse is so wonderful, and I wanted to testify to that, and I was just so amazed by it. He's a character who appears in the book, but he's never alive, which is strange. But I also moved him through time and space because he wasn't alive at that time. But I was so I hope that it was understood to be just sort of my wonder and amazement at his work, and how when I became aware of it, it's a book that has a fair number of dreams in it too. I started dreaming of all of his wooden birds coming to life and the angels flying, and so yeah. I was thinking too. I can't remember talking about memoir of daydream, but that's probably about right. I was thinking I might write, in talking about how this book interacts in that space. I was thinking a lot about the artist Charles Birchfield, who's a watercolor painter who died in 1967, and who I write about a fair amount in the book, and whose writings I found so helpful and so amazing. And that painting of the forest fire and the moonlight is one of his paintings. And I thought maybe I would read just a little tiny section about Birchfield and my dad, which might make my mom cry, probably make me cry. Read it.
Are you sure you wrote this book?
I love writing. I think I did. That's a good question. not that chronological, so, but the pictures help me. There are pictures in the book, so that's sort of. One afternoon in the summer, Mrs. Abel, my father asked me to sit down on a stump in the garden where he was picking radishes to talk with him. He said he had something important to say to me. He was kneeling, the sun shining down behind the cabin. He wore a broad-brimmed hat, his face in shadow, a red bandana around his neck. Bees zipped around us. A pine snake slipped away under the low stone wall. I sat there anxiously waiting for him to speak, uncertain if he was going to comment on something I had done or had not been doing. Had he been watching me more closely than it seems? In your life, my father said, speaking with great earnestness, one of the greatest pleasures, one of the most important uses of time is to daydream. In writing a diary, Charles Birchfield notes in 1911, I first thought that only events should be written. Then gradually I began to put descriptions in, which led me to describe my feelings at seeing different scenes and objects. Now I think I ought to put in my imaginings, for they are part of a person's life. Another question or two? People have it? Yes.
Literally, everywhere we've traveled in the world, we've run into people who knew about Georgetown, who were on a ship in the Mediterranean with two older people, and we were talking about Berlin, and we mentioned Ephraim, and they said, "You know Addie Crump?" I mean, Addie, she'd been dead for a while, I think, but I think everybody knows about Georgetown. You know, obviously, when we're traveling around promoting the book, have you found that to be true?
Sometimes, I mean, sometimes people say, is this a real place? Like, I think that's kind of true, and it's always dangerous, and maybe more so here, because everyone has a very, one reason that I started writing the book also is that my girls, back when they cared to ask me such questions, they would often ask, tell us a story about when you were little. What were you doing? And I spent probably 3 months out of every year up here, but probably about 90% of the stories I had to tell them were from up here. And part of that was I was not in school and I was running through the woods and I had a lot more freedom. But everyone has, who spends a lot of time up here has a really an emotional reaction to it, and we all see it in very different ways. So anytime I write a book that is set someplace and I go to that actual place and read from it, there are a couple people who are like, oh yeah, you got it, you're closer. But most people are just like, no, it's not, you failed, this is not correct. So that's kind of a sideways answer. But mostly, yeah, people are excited. And I think there's something great about reading about specific places where you've been. It makes a story that is a fictional story feel real, to see and hear characters doing things in places you've been. Yes?
I have a question from some of our patrons that couldn't be here tonight, and they've been fascinated and interested with the process of going from a book to a movie, and what some of that felt like for you, and experiencing that, and you wanted to just share a little bit about that with My Abandonment and Leave No Trace.
That's kind of I could talk for a long time and get really mad.
Oh, okay.
Or I could talk for a short time and be really cheerful.
Well, I'll say it from the perspective of there's actually a young teen who's looking at getting into the movie business.
Right.
And he is fascinated by talking to people who work behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. And in particular, so somebody like in your case, when you're adapting a book into a film, and so maybe talking about it from that perspective.
Right.
Yeah.
It's so hard to make anything, and mostly things fail. One of the blessings of being a fiction writer is it's very cheap. Making a film is so expensive, and it's so much about money, and I learned so much about that as I traveled through it. That book, My Abandonment, was optioned before it was published, which was in, I guess, 2007. And so it's over 12 years ago, and I wrote it over 14 years ago. So, that's a way that they can get the rights to make a film cheaply. But it took about 10 years of them paying me very little money for them to pay me not that much money to do whatever they wanted with it. But it was fascinating in a number of ways. It was fascinating to imagine what it might look like, to see what was important to other people in the story. I spent a lot of time with the director, Deborah Brannick, and her co-writer, Anna Rossellini, and part of it was they had to keep me happy until they went into production, I see in retrospect. But we spent a lot of time walking through Forest Park where this father and daughter lived, and talking about the story and changes they wanted to make. And I sort of decided early on that I was going to try to be the most amenable, sweetest person and just let them realize their vision as much as they could. And it was kind of fascinating to read, and it was kind of terrible to read the adaptations because so little of my book, especially the dialogue, which I worked so hard on, there are places, it's leaping ahead, it's hard to know when a film gets edited what will be in the film. So in the last cut of the film, whenever there's snippets of dialogue that I wrote, I feel like, oh, now things are getting real. Like now this is really great. But my experience of the film will never be like other people's. Like I have a complicated relationship because of that, because it's not exactly how I saw it. But I think I talked to, I'm trying to think of how much I want to say about this, but I won't say it. I talked to Daniel Woodrell, who wrote Winter's Bone, which was the last film that Deborah had made. And I hadn't talked to him while they were making my film, but he was so angry in so many different ways. 12 years after that film came out and made Jennifer Lawrence a star and everything. One reason I was happy with them making the film is I like Winter's Bone. And I think he did not, and he had issues with them personally. And it's a really hard job being a director. So other positive things I would say are, it was just cool to be on set and to see how many people were working on a small film like that, to see the actors. I think the acting in that film is great. Will Thomason and Ben are amazing people and great actors, so that was sweet to watch. But then just the photographers, all the sound people, the person who flew the drone, the caterers, the animal wranglers, there's 100 people. And I kind of felt in a way, I was just strutting around saying, without me, none of them would have a job. But I was also thinking, like, basically what we're seeing here is my head, like, exploded into a bunch of jobs. Because what I do when I write is I'm trying to handle all these things at once. So it was just sort of, I tried to just see it as a fascinating process to see how, but then to see, say, like how the budget of the film shifted when different actors were attached, to see things fall apart a number of times and come back together, to see how important things like, $20 million Oscar campaigns are, or to not be invited to a lot of things. The last thing I'll say is kind of a great example of how it was is I went the first day, I went to the set, and I watched the whole morning, and I saw the director, Deborah, at lunch, and I said, hi, and she didn't seem that excited to see me, and she said, well, this afternoon we're just going to do some bike riding. I don't think you probably don't want to watch it, and I said, oh, I've been here all morning. She looked quite shocked. And I said, yeah, I've taken a lot of notes and I have some feedback for you. And I saw her face just change into this kind of Trojan warrior look. And she was not interested in having, I'm kidding, like you're the filmmaker, I'm not. And as much as I always wanted to be so amenable and cool about it, and as much as intellectually I knew what was going to happen, emotionally I couldn't have prepared for how I felt watching it, which it was really hard. But that's not that helpful to someone who is looking into it. It's amazing in filmmaking how people make a living and don't ever get anything made. And so you have to kind of detach the sense of like, I want to realize something, and just enjoy the work and enjoy the collaboration. And I think that being on set and seeing the kind of fellowship and excitement of all the people working together and how proud they were of what they were making it made me sort of jealous. I think that's sort of reason enough.
Do you have a favorite scene that you feel was a great snippet representation that reflected the book?
I think the first 20 minutes of the film is great. Okay, take one more question.
What was your inspiration for that story?
For My Abandonment, I was writing a book called The Bewildered, and parts of that book took place in Forest Park, which is, I think, the largest nature preserve in an urban environment in Portland. And around that time, there was a story in the newspaper about how this father and daughter had been found living there. And they had lived there for 4 years. And he had been homeschooling her, and she seemed to be ahead of where she should have been in school. And I think the good people of Portland, progressive people, all took this as sort of an indictment on the materialistic way that we live there, kind of celebrated in a certain way. And then, paradoxically, there was this desire to set them up in a way that kind of, they seem to be doing well and they're happy, but if they lived like we live, they would be happier. And so they got him a job, and she was going to go to school. And then a couple of weeks later, there was a second article about them, how they disappeared in the middle of the night. And I was trying to write this girl into the book I was writing, but she was doing a lot of watching. And there are parts in My Abandonment where there's sections of The Bewildered happening and she's watching them. But in The Bewildered, she was a distraction. And at the same time, I was waiting for the third newspaper article to account for where they went and what happened, and it never happened. And it was never written. So I'm a fiction writer. So in my mind, I kept thinking, where could they have gone? What could have happened to them? But also, how did they live? Where did they come from? How did they survive? Like, what was their relationship like? And as I was saying earlier, when I look back at things I wrote, I recognized what was at stake for me. And I thought it was a great story, which it was, but I was also racing the birth of my first daughter. And when I look at that book, I could just see my anxiety about fatherhood everywhere throughout it. So that was the inspiration for the book, just that newspaper article. So I know people need to eat and drink, myself included. So again, Peter's Selling Books, thank you for coming so much. And I will leave it at that. Thanks for coming.